Hi everyone, I just wanted to do a brief video about International Financial Reporting Standards. They are mentioned in each chapter. They're the very end of each chapter, immediately preceding the following chapter. So you will see information about these in each chapter. Please read through them. I didn't go through them as we were going along, only because I thought it might be a little bit too overwhelming. And I've got, some notes about some things I thought might be rather important or interesting in each chapter. So first of all, you'll notice in chapter 1, when you read it, you will see that they feel that IFRS, which is International Financial Reporting Standards, are more principle-oriented, GAAP more rule-oriented. Now, of course, under GAAP, you still do have principles, right? You've got your full disclosure, your matching, your revenues, your costs. You have those principles still. But IFRS is seen as being more principle-oriented, GAAP more rule-oriented. Chapter 2, they make a few different important pieces, or give you a few different important pieces of information. One that is under both GAAP and IFRS, your general rules of debit and credit are similar. They're the same. The journal, the ledger, chart of accounts, all the same. So those are fairly important and they're fairly consistent between both IFRS and GAAP. It's all the same. Your transaction analysis is the same under IFRS and GAAP. Some of your actual transactions are recorded differently, but the transaction analysis is the same under the two. One other rather important piece of information is that what you're going to see are use of fair value to report assets. I believe they mention it a little bit in chapter 2. It goes into it a little more in chapter 4. But the use of fair value to report assets is increasing in both GAAP and IFRS. It is increasing. IFRS has adopted it more broadly. And as I said, they start off mentioning it a little bit in chapter 2, but they really mention it much more in chapter 4. But as I said, it's increasing in both. IFRS, however, has adopted it more broadly. Something you will see in chapter 3 that I think is important is your cash basis accounting. It's not according to IFRS, same as GAAP, right? So that is the same. Time period assumption applied under GAAP and IFRS. They both have a time period assumption. So there's a similarity also. A revenue recognition under IFRS, generally the same as revenue recognition under GAAP, but it's less detailed guidance. So under IFRS, there is less detailed guidance than under GAAP. But again, there's similarities. In chapter 4, under IFRS, current assets are usually listed in reverse order of liquidity. So under GAAP, we would see cash first, whereas under IFRS, we would see cash last. So that's interesting with the current assets. Chapter 5, under both GAAP and IFRS, a company can choose to use either perpetual or periodic system, whichever they choose. I thought that was interesting. Chapter 6, GAAP permits the use of LIFO, right? When you're valuing your inventory, it's permitted. Under IFRS, they do not allow that. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit. Chapter 7, basic concepts related to an accounting information system are the same for both IFRS and GAAP. Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 you can read. There wasn't a lot of information I thought wasn't clear. Chapter 10, definition for plan assets for IFRS and GAAP is essentially the same. Residual value is used by the IFRS, which I sometimes say myself, instead of the term salvage value. So I sometimes use residual value, so I find that interesting. And that was basically, other than I believe in chapter 11 they also mention liabilities. The basic definition under GAAP and IFRS is pretty much the same. But read through all that information. It's really interesting, very informative. But as I said, there's some high points I wanted to mention. Other than that, read through it all. It's good information to read. It's really interesting. And that was about it. As I said, I just wanted to kind of hit some high points, and I didn't mention it when we were going through chapters because I really didn't want to overwhelm anyone. But if you have any questions about it, please contact me. Feel free to call me, mail message me, and have a good week.